Okay, so the first thing we want to do here is calculate depreciation. We're going to start with straight line. We'll use the same scenario for each of our three methods of depreciation we're going to complete, which are straight line, double declining balance, and units of activity. So the prompt here says, at the beginning of the year, Titan Trucking purchased a used Kenworth truck at a cost of $48,000. Titan Trucking expects the truck to remain useful for 4 years, or 800,000 miles, and to have a residual value of $8,000. Titan Trucking expects the truck to be driven 160,000 miles the first year and 280,000 miles the second year. Okay, let's see what we get to do here. So first thing we need to do is figure out what our formula is for calculating straight line. And remember, it's the easiest formula that we have. It goes cost minus residual or salvage. Same, means the same thing, just a different term, and divided by its useful life. Okay, so that will be our straight line depreciation. Okay, so let's look here. Our cost was $48,000. The residual value was 8. That's 40,000 over the expected useful life. Now for straight line, that would be in time. So it says that was for 4 years. So that's 40,000 divided by 4. It makes $10,000 depreciation per year under straight line. Now just a caveat here, this particular one happens to say at the beginning of the year. If we didn't own the truck for the entire year, say we bought it on March 31st, we would have to then multiply this annual amount times the length of time that we actually owned it during the year. So if we bought it March 31st, we would have only owned it for 9 months, April through December, and hence we would take 10,000 times 9 over 12 and get the answer there. Okay, let's move on. Calculating double declining balance depreciation. Okay, this one is very similar. But remember, this one starts a little bit differently. It starts with our book value. Book value. And I guess the question then becomes, how do we determine book value? So if you remember, we take the cost of our asset minus any accumulated depreciation that we've already taken on that asset. So in the first year, we wouldn't have any accumulated depreciation. That would be 0. But after that first year, we will have some accumulated depreciation. And every year, we're going to have to recalculate what our actual amount of depreciation is. Whereas under straight line, it stays the same. For example, in our last scenario, it was always $10,000 per year. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so in this case, our book value is the $48,000 because, as I said a second ago, we don't have any depreciation yet. So let's do year 1. I'll do a couple just to give you an idea. So we'll take that book value, I'm going to abbreviate BV, multiply that times 2 over the useful life. That's the double part of this calculation. We're going to take a lot of depreciation early on. That's going to give us twice the rate that we would have had under straight line depreciation. And that will give us our annual amount of depreciation. So book value in year 1, I guess I could write that over here. Book value, erase that. Book value in year 1 will be 48,000 times 2 over the useful life, which was 4 years. So it's going to be 1/2. So that should be $24,000 in year 1. Okay, so let's look. What would our book value be now in year 2? We'll take the 48,000 minus this first year's worth of depreciation, 24,000. So my book value now for year 2 begins with 24,000. Same rate, 2 over 4, 2 over the useful life, or 1/2. So that's going to be 12,000 for year 2. And then in year 3, my book value will go down by another 12, by the 12,000. So I have had, then in year 3, my accumulated depreciation will have been 36,000, which is going to be those added together. So 12,000 then is my book value times 2 over 4. And that will be 6,000, and so on and so forth. So, just one last quick comment here about double declining balance method. You have to make sure in all cases that we never depreciate below salvage. So it can let you do that under this particular salvage or residual value under this particular method. So you have to make a mental note here to never depreciate below your residual or your salvage value, and it will allow you to do that. So you have to pay attention and back out the amount of depreciation you take in that final year so that you don't go over and exceed the residual value. Once we hit residual, we stop depreciating even if we continue to use that asset. Alright, the last one we have will be our units of activity. And if you remember, we're going to take the cost, our depreciable cost again, which is cost minus our residual. And this time we're going to divide it by its useful life, but useful life in units. Could be hours and miles in this case. A lot of tractors and other kinds of equipment use hours. And then that will give us our depreciable cost per unit. Which we then multiply by the actual units of activity. Okay, to get our depreciation expense for that particular year. So let's go ahead and do this problem. So we know cost was 48. My residual after 4 years was 8,000. And my useful life in units is 800,000 miles. Okay, so let's go ahead and calculate that. That's going to be 40,000 over 800,000. And that is going to be equal to 0.05. Then we multiply that 0.05, so it's telling you the depreciation expense per mile driven is going to be a nickel. So 0.05 times the actual miles driven in year 1, which is 160,000 miles, will give us $8,000 in depreciation for year 1. Now we can do the same thing here in year 2. We take the same depreciation cost per unit. That's not going to change. What is going to change is the miles that were actually driven during that second year. In this case, it went up to 280,000. Perhaps they owned it a greater portion of the year. And that comes out to, let's see, 14,000. So every year it may be different. So this method is pretty good when we do have fluctuations in our activity.